How's everyone doing? Ouroboros here with my guide for Hydross the Unstable, the first boss in Serpent Shrine Cavern. Hydross is a relatively easy boss, but can cause some headaches if your raid can't stop DPS when required. I'm going to go over two different methods of killing Hydross in this guide. The method for you is going to depend on your raid composition and more importantly your raid DPS, as one method is basically doing the fight properly and the other is more of a burn strat. First up, I'm going to go over the proper strategy so we can get familiar with the boss and its mechanics. For raid composition, you're going to want to bring along 3 tanks, 2 of which are going to need a resistance set. One caps nature and the other caps frost. The third tank will be picking up adds and does not require any resistance. 5 or 6 healers, whatever you're comfortable with, and a mix of DPS. Now let's jump into the mechanics of the fight. Hydross has 2 different forms he can take. These are swapped between depending on his position on the platform, as can be seen here. The blue line indicates the area where he will transition from poison to frost, and the green line indicates where he will transition from frost to poison. The boss will transition or change forms, drop threat, and spawn 4 elemental adds each time he transitions form crossing over the lines. If the boss accidentally crosses this line and spawns extra adds, it'll be almost impossible to recover from, so DPS need to be really on the ball with stopping DPS and healers with healing threat. The boss will begin the fight in his frost form. While in this form, he only has 2 abilities that he will use. The first of these abilities is Mark of Hydross. This ability will stack up to 6 times and increases the amount of frost damage taken by all players. This is applied every 15 seconds while Hydross is in his frost form and increases damage taken by 10%, 25%, 50%, 100%, 250%, and 500% as each stack is applied. The second ability he will use is Water Tomb. This ability is targeted and will stun the target and all players within 8 yards for 5 seconds, dealing 4,500 frost damage over 5 seconds. To mitigate this, all players should maintain an 8 to 10 yard spread while the boss is in his frost form. Before actually pulling the boss, your tanks may want to start generating resources on the constantly spawning elementals before actually pulling the boss. Once you're ready to pull the boss, the frost resistance tank needs to rush in and pick up the boss, being sure the boss does not cross over the line indicated here. To make this safer, the tank can start by using an invisibility potion on the pull if required. DPS and healers need to spread around the platform trying to maintain the 8 yard spread to mitigate Water Tomb. Every 15 seconds, a stack of Mark of Hydross will be applied to the raid. You want to be causing the boss to transition as this debuff reaches 100%, which will be the 4th application. As this 4th application is nearing, DPS should be ready to stop damage as there is a complete threat wipe when the boss transitions. Dot users need to take extra care here for ticks right as he transitions. Once 100% is reached, the frost resistance tank should start moving the boss over the transition line to its poison form, and the poison resistance tank will now take over tanking the boss. When the boss changes form, it will also spawn the 4 elemental adds which need to be picked up by the 3rd tank and cleaved. During his poison phase, the boss will use 2 new abilities and will no longer use his frost abilities. These abilities are Mark of Corruption. This functions exactly the same as Mark of Hydross, stacking every 15 seconds, but is increased nature damage rather than frost. The second ability is Vile Sludge, which will be applied to a random raid member roughly every 15 seconds. This ability deals 4,000 nature damage over 24 seconds and reduces the damage and healing done by the target by 50%. Healers should be sure to be able to see who has this debuff and keep heals on them. As this phase begins, make sure you give your tanks time to pick up the boss and the adds before DPSing. Hunters can help here by dropping a frost trap under the boss as he transitions to slow the elementals when they spawn. Cleave the adds down while DPSing the boss until the 100% or 4th application of Mark of Corruption is coming up. As before, DPS needs to prepare to slow and stop DPS. Healers need to make sure they're not going to pull threat. Healers and DPS should move over to the opposite side of the platform in preparation for transitioning the boss back to frost form. Once Mark of Corruption hits 100%, the nature tank will drag the boss back over the line to transition the boss back to frost. The frost resistance tank will now pick up the boss again, 4 elementals will spawn, and these need to be dealt with the same as before. Once the boss is positioned, healers and DPS should move back into positions from the very start, keeping an 8 yard spread. This is just the same as the start of the fight, except you have the 4 adds to deal with. This is basically the entire fight, and it's rinse and repeat until the boss dies. Ideally, you should have the boss dead before the next poison form, or shortly after transitioning into poison form. Now that covers pretty much how the boss is intended to be done. Now let's move on to the burn strat. For the burn strat, you do not need your 3rd tank that would have been picking up the adds using the previous strat. The other requirement here is that you have at least 4 Warlocks in your raid. Now for the most part, the fight will play out just like it did using the normal strat, except this time when you transition to poison form, the Warlocks will each banish an elemental and keep it banished for the rest of the fight. If the fight goes on long enough to have a second frost form, these 4 elementals will need to be fed while maintaining the banish on the previous 4 adds. To successfully pull off this strat, you're going to need to have enough DPS to kill the boss on that first poison phase or shortly after transitioning into the second frost phase. And that's really all there is to it. The idea being to just burn the boss, ignoring the adds entirely. You'll want to do some min-maxing on your raid groups to make sure you're pulling out the most DPS you possibly can. Just an extra last second note that I'd like to add here. On the PTR, shamans that were placing Searing Totem were almost 100% of the time pulling threat when the boss transitioned. So shamans need to be very aware that they don't have totems down when the boss is transitioning. And this concludes my guide for Hydross the Unstable. If you found this guide helpful, please drop a like. If you want to see more content coming up, please subscribe. Thank you.